Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. This is talk on executable philosophy, a new philosophical methodology that I've been developing for a while now. Thank you, Gabrielle, for hosting. There's two major sections to this talk. First, I will be talking about three major problems with the way philosophy is done today, and then I will talk about a single solution that solves, I think, each of those issues, or at least helps us dramatically make those problems less severe. So what's wrong with the way philosophy is done today? Briefly, it's ambiguous. I think we need to make philosophy much more precise. I'll show how we can do that. Often we end up positing or claiming the existence of various entities, various objects that I don't think exist. I understand why people posit them, and we will talk about ways that we may be able to either avoid positing these entities or show that they don't need to be posited in the first place. And thirdly, an issue with philosophy is that whenever we're working in a particular branch of philosophy, doing just logic or just ethics or philosophy of physics or what have you, we end up focusing on, it makes sense, we end up focusing on a particular problem that we're trying to solve, and we end up making assumptions about the other branches in order to just kind of make progress with our argument, but as a result, I think we end up making naive assumptions and not defending those very important assumptions that we do make. And I will talk about why this occurs and some ways that we can try to solve it. So here's an example of modern philosophy from the great Bertrand Russell, one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century. He's talking about philosophy of language, and here he says, he gives a definition of sorts of what he means by a denoting phrase in his very famous paper called On Denoting. He says, by denoting phrase, I mean a phrase such as any one of the following: a man, some man, any man, every man, all men, the present king of England, the present king of France, the center of mass of the solar system at the first instant of the 20th century, the revolution of the earth around the sun, the revolution of the sun around the earth. Thus a phrase is denoting solely in virtue of its form. He's talking about the structure of these phrases that makes them denote, according to him. Okay, so that's what he means by a denoting phrase. What about the phrase "my shoe"? Is that a denoting phrase according to his definition? It doesn't perfectly match anything that he described. If we said a shoe or the shoe or something like that, some shoe, then it would. This seems like the kind of thing he had in mind, but it doesn't exactly match. So it probably is not a denoting phrase according to what he said. It's hard to say exactly. Here's one. If you say the, now that is a phrase that matches what he says he has in mind, what he says is a denoting phrase. Now the is not grammatical. It does have the proper structure, but he doesn't say that a phrase needs to be within conformity to any particular rules of grammar. So it seems like this does satisfy his definition, but he probably wouldn't want it to. But anyway, in both of these cases, it's hard to say for sure whether or not they are denoting cases or denoting phrases according to Russell's definition. So you can legitimately debate whether or not these count or should count, or whether or not he thought they counted as denoting phrases. So that's one problem. But it's not just, well, Bertrand Russell's dead, so we can't ask him. It's not just that. A broader problem this speaks to in philosophy is someone will put forth a philosophical argument and define it in a way that seems kind of like the way Russell defined his. And then someone will come along and say, here's a problem with your theory. In this situation, here's what it says, and that's absurd. There's something wrong with your theory. And it's not uncommon for someone to say, well, you just misunderstood my theory. My theory would never say something so absurd. Of course it needs to be a grammatical phrase. I didn't say that explicitly, but it's obvious. Or maybe there'll be a very serious problem with their theory, and they will again say, you misunderstood, let me clarify my theory for you. And then they end up, I think, making substantially different claims. They end up changing their theory. without really admitting they're doing so. It's very difficult to tangibly land a blow when someone can say, well, you just don't know what I meant, but I will tell you, in such a way that's very flattering to the original interpretation of my theory. So it would be nice if in philosophy we didn't have that sort of problem at all. So the problem I'm underscoring here is that of ambiguity. Like I said, Russell's description is, or his description of his theory does seem to be ambiguous. It's hard to say exactly what is or is not a denoting phrase. But while we can point to examples and say, yes, those are ambiguous, I think those are ambiguous, hard to say for sure, there's the deeper issue of, okay, what does a precise philosophical theory look like? How much more detail would he have to add in order for it to be clear that there are no additional ambiguities? This is a very hard problem. It's a very big question. But remember this issue, which we will come back to later on, and my attempt to solve it. So the second problem with the way philosophy is done these days, and has been done for a very long time, is what I think are indefensible existence claims. People claim that certain things exist, and they have arguments for why these things exist, even though we don't have direct evidence. So here's some examples of what I mean. Sometimes philosophers will say that things like numbers, lines, circles, and other mathematical objects exist in Platonic heaven. So Plato believed that humans were born knowing everything. And, of course, nobody believes this today. That's ridiculous. But there is the issue of, well, human beings never actually experience numbers directly. We have this idea of a number. You can count particular objects, but it seems like, it seems like with modern science and just a modern sort of scientific way of viewing the world, that people learn whatever they learn through experience. But again, you never directly see a number, a line, a circle. So a line is a one-dimensional object. Okay, it has zero width. You can't see something with zero width. It just has a length. How do you see things at all? Light bounces off of something, and it bounces into your eye, and then you can see it. Light can't bounce off a one-dimensional object. So we have a clear notion of line. We don't see them. How can we explain this knowledge that we seem to have? So people say, well, humans were somehow born with this knowledge or something like that. But we end up positing numbers, lines, circles as entities independent of physical reality. So people say, okay, I say 3 and you say 3. It's not clear what the number 3 is. We're talking about the same thing. How can we explain the apparent fact that we think we're talking about the same thing? Well, maybe the number 3 is an abstract entity. It's hard to say exactly what that is, outside of physical reality, and we're both referring to it. That's what solidifies. That's what makes it the fact. That's what makes it true that when you say 3 and I say 3, that we're talking about the same thing. I hope that there are ways that we can explain that where we don't have to claim that these other things exist. It doesn't seem very scientific, but on the other hand, how do we have this knowledge? It's tricky. So they end up positing strange things, but it seems like there may be good reason to do so. Another example is believing in references between words and objects. It's not just, hey, when I say computer, I have something in mind, and I'm trying to get you to understand what I'm saying. It's somehow they in philosophy of language, they often go beyond that and think of a reference as a thing that exists in some sense. When I say computer, what does computer mean? Well, it means whatever it refers to. Well, how does it refer to things? Well, there must be a reference between the word and the object. So, it's good to try to go deeper into problems and try to explain what's going on, but I really worry that we start claiming that all these extra things exist that we don't need to posit. But again, if you are drilling down in the details of philosophy of language, it is convenient to talk about references. A third thing that I think is a little bit odd, a little bit hard to defend is moral facts that are independent of human psychology or evolution. So in a sort of naturalistic way, it's like, okay, humans evolved to have certain attitudes towards certain behaviors for evolutionary reasons. Killing people seems like, nobody wants to be killed. It seems immoral. Hopefully we can give an account that is more sort of naturalistic. There's lots of people who believe in moral facts that don't try to believe in anything supernatural per se. But anyway, here's the kinds of things that they believe in. As I started to allude to, why do they believe in these things? Well, they think they have to in order to explain knowledge of mathematical entities and apparent moral facts and how language works. Specifically, isn't it obviously true that murder is immoral? You horrible person. Who could deny? Who could deny that even if humans didn't exist, of course murder is immoral? This isn't about humans. This is about something broader. So you can make the case that there's something deeper going on here, and you can't just talk about evolution or humans specifically. But again, I think it's ultimately hard to defend the existence. What is a moral fact if it's independent of humans? People say, well, that must not be in physical reality. Have you ever seen a moral fact? No. Maybe they're in platonic heaven or some other place. It's very hard. You can see how people end up kind of tying themselves in knots when they're trying to just explain murder is clearly wrong. Rather, humans exist. So how do we explain that? So here's why you might believe in such things. But here's the critical point. Is it necessary to claim that these things exist in order to explain these phenomena about knowledge of math and apparent moral facts? Is it necessary? If someone can show that you can't explain these things without claiming that these non-physical entities exist, then I think that would be sufficient reason to do so. So wouldn't it be nice if we could somehow definitively show that it is possible to explain these things explain these phenomena without claiming non-physical entities exist outside of the universe? That would be nice. So, of course, I mention that because I will be talking about a potential solution later. But personally, I think it's important to have a conservative ontology, to not say, I'm not sure if you can explain these phenomena without claiming these other things exist, so I will. You risk the chance of never being able to defend the existence of these things, and therefore you ultimately can't defend your theory, if your theory relies on the existence of these strange entities. So, when I argue against philosophical theories, ontology is often the first thing I jump on. You claim this thing exists, you can't defend that. There's lots of other things you talk about after that. You can't defend that initial claim, therefore we have no reason to believe your theory. But to be fair, if they could show that they have to posit these things, then I think they would be justified in doing so. Third problem of philosophy, I mentioned at the very beginning, is you're working on one branch of philosophy, you end up either consciously or unconsciously making naive and generally or almost always unjustified assumptions about these other branches. So here's an example. So there's lots of ethical thought experiments that involve runaway trolley cars, and we'll say something like, okay, there's a trolley car that's sort of a runaway trolley car. You see that it's headed for 5 people, and it will probably kill them if it keeps going. But if it goes along another track, it will only kill 1 person. And there's a lever that happens to be right next to you, and you have a choice. Is it moral to pull the lever and to kill the 1 person and having the other 5 people live? Or should you not do anything and just let the situation play out and not risk personally killing somebody? So there's lots of things involving trolley cars where you have some control and you get to choose. We get to test our intuitions a lot about what's the difference between killing somebody and letting them die when you easily could have prevented it and things like that. So you could have a thought experiment, an ethical thought experiment that starts something like, suppose 2 runaway trolley cars take off simultaneously in opposite directions. Maybe you're supposed to do something with one of them or not the other, whatever. Well, okay, right at the very, very beginning, we said simultaneously these two trolley cars are moving apart. Well, according to special relativity, there is no such thing as absolute simultaneity. Now, if you're in a certain reference frame, basically if you're traveling a certain velocity relative to the two objects you're talking about, then you can talk about them moving apart at the same time. But anyway, Einstein showed that if you're traveling a sort of a sufficient fraction of the speed of light, that maybe one of them starts moving before the other is what would happen if you're traveling sort of fast enough. It's very hard to imagine, but anyway, so maybe you think, okay, but we're doing ethics, the laws of physics don't matter here. But I bet you didn't think that we were talking about a physically impossible scenario when we started to lay out this very basic ethical situation. Now, and I think that if we had an ethical theory that worked for all physically possible situations, that, okay, maybe it wouldn't work, maybe there would be problems with it in physically impossible scenarios, but I think it would be very useful to have such a theory and to rule out the possibility of us coming up with one by just being willing to talk about physically impossible scenarios and possibly say, well, in this scenario that we could fill in here about the two runaway trolley cars traveling in opposite directions simultaneously, maybe we would rule out a theory of ethics because it doesn't handle the situation well. And it's physically impossible for that to occur. So the main point here is, even with branches of philosophy as completely different as physics or philosophy of physics and ethics, you try to just focus on one branch and you end up making assumptions about other branches that impact the situation you're talking about. So, yeah, it's incompatible to talk about absolute simultaneity in physical situation. So why do we do this in the first place? Why do philosophers not be extra thorough? Well, it's really, really complicated to factor in all of philosophy when you're trying to do any philosophy, right? Here's my situation. Yes, something's physically occurring. Okay, that has to do with laws of physics, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about ethics. So I don't fault people too much for, yes, we're not handling that branch right now. Yes, you have a weird objection related to Einstein or something. We're talking about trolley cars. It is very hard to account for or to take into account all of that complexity. So it would be nice if there were some way that we wouldn't have to face all that complexity, but we could somehow take into account or perhaps automatically determine when we're talking about a situation that is physically impossible, or when we make an inappropriate or maybe even flat-out false assumption about other branches of philosophy that impact our current work, whichever branch we're working in. So, okay. Now here comes the solution. I've created a new philosophical methodology. I'm going to try to show now that all three of these problems, 2.5 to 3 of these problems, are completely solved by executable philosophy. That's the name of my methodology. What is the key idea behind executable philosophy? It's that you should create philosophy that you can then execute just like a computer program, because it is a computer program. That is, instead of doing philosophy in a natural language, such as English or German, I think we should do philosophy in a programming language. So that is that in software we construct philosophical theories, thought experiments, these ideas that we have, objects that we claim to exist, and so on. Right now the focus is on theories, because there's a lot of bang for your buck when you take a whole philosophical theory, implement it in code. And that's important because we can compute, given a particular philosophical theory that we've defined in software, we can compute facts, just objective facts about, hey, in this situation, what does this philosophical theory say? The computer just computes the answer. And you define the theory completely. It's not kind of in software and kind of in the author's head, and you kind of need the permission in order to object to their theory because they might have to clarify it for you. That completely goes away if you just implement the damn theory in software. So let's talk more about that. When you define this terminology, all your terminology in software, all your terms are defined and they're well defined. Russell's theory was not well defined. It wasn't. There's all these ambiguities about different situations, whether or not his theory applies. Is this a denoting phrase? Is that a denoting phrase? But when you implement a philosophical theory as an algorithm in software, it will either say it's true that this is a denoting phrase, it's false that this is a denoting phrase. And I'll show an example in a moment of what this looks like, but that relieves the type of ambiguity that we saw at the beginning, and I will talk more about that. So, and also, and I think this should be a major philosophical project that we take on, once you translate or sort of implement a lot of philosophical ideas, especially theories, build them in code, in a programming language, in software, that allows you to compute facts about the what each particular theory says, and then also do very interesting things related to the sort of interconnection or between different philosophical theories. So specifically, we can compute facts about which theories you can consistently believe or consistently hold. And we can programmatically find inconsistencies, logical inconsistencies, in sets of beliefs that people have, as long as these beliefs are constructed in software. This is something that it's simply not possible to do when you're doing everything in English. Nothing is well defined enough to just compute the answer. There's a lot of corner cases, there's ambiguities. So, what does executable philosophy look like? So here is def. So this is valid syntax for the Python programming language. Executable philosophy is currently done in Python. Def stands for define function. So we're defining a function called isEven. It takes a number, and then here's the algorithm that we use for determining whether that input is even. And this basically says if the number is divisible by 2, then return true, else return false. So what does it mean for a number to be even? Well, if it's divisible by 2, then it's true that it's even. If it's not divisible by 2, then it's false. So you can print is even of 4. 4 is even. It returns true. That's correct. Is even of 5 is false because 5 is odd. So here's sort of a simplified version of a definition of is a denoting phrase. We have an is a denoting phrase function. The input is a phrase, and the output is going to be true or false, whether or not that phrase that you input is a denoting phrase according to this algorithm. So with executable philosophy, you can say, when I say a denoting phrase, what do I mean? I mean exactly what I've implemented here. It's not in English, and you have to guess about what I mean in certain weird cases. So let's walk through the code. So the input, the argument here is a phrase. In Python, you can take a string. A string is a sequence of characters like letters or numbers and spaces and whatnot. And you can call dot split. And this will take something like some man, suppose this is phrase, and it splits it on spaces, and then you get a list of the individual words in that sentence, basically, or in that phrase. So now we have some and man, if we suppose that phrase equals some man to begin with. And then, okay, well, if the phrase is an empty phrase and there's no words and the length of words is 0, meaning they didn't type any words, well then I'm going to say that if there's no phrase, if it's an empty phrase, that's not a denoting phrase. Now, if we take the first word, in this example, some, and we lowercase it, in which case we get lowercase S-O-M-E instead of uppercase, we can ask, basically, is the first word in this phrase in this list of words? That is the first word here equal to a, some, any, every, or all? If you remember, Russell said phrases like a man, some man, any man, every man, all men those are denoting phrases. So we're trying to see if the phrase that the person passed in as input to this function is of the proper structure. That is the first word in this phrase one of these words? And if it is, we return true and say yes, that phrase is a denoting phrase. And then you would want to do more sophisticated checks. He had the center of the mass of the universe in the first instant of the 21st century. So you want to do more sophisticated checks in order to see if something's a denoting phrase. But this gives you a taste of what a well-defined algorithm looks like that implements a philosophical theory, or really any, just about any philosophical claim. We made it well-defined, and we can compute facts about what is and is not a denoting phrase in this sense. So let's look at some of those examples. Is a denoting phrase of some man? True. We know that should be true. That's what Russell said specifically. We asked before, my shoe. It was ambiguous in the original implementation. Well, according to this implementation, according to this notion of what it is to be a denoting phrase, it is false that my shoe is a denoting phrase, because my isn't one of those words like some or a or any. The. Again, that was ambiguous. It has the proper structure. It begins with a, therefore, it begins with the word a, therefore it's a denoting phrase. Now, if somebody thinks that they can improve upon our notion of is a denoting phrase, if they don't think that should count, they're free to create a different function that is maybe similar but different, that they think is more, either honest is more representative of what Russell originally meant, or what he or she thinks we should mean by a denoting phrase. But anyway, we just computed the fact that the is a denoting phrase according to this algorithm. Now here's an interesting example. If you just say a, the first word in this sentence is a, and therefore, sorry, I mistyped that. It's true that this is a denoting phrase because a is the first word here. So I will fix that. But okay, so here's a good example where, wait a second, we forgot to do a check to see if there's at least two words in the phrase, like there was in all of Russell's examples. So we probably should check to see if len of words is less than 2, then we should say that that's no good. There needs to be at least 2 words. But anyway, I use this example because it gives you a taste of, well, when you're translating something from English into code, you can make mistakes, or you can define things that have consequences that you didn't want. But one thing that is impossible to do from now on, as long as we do philosophy in this format, it is impossible to debate what the output is to these, to a philosophical theory, to a function, given a certain input. You just look at your computer screen and you can see the answer that we've computed. So that's a kind of debate that should completely disappear. That's what I mentioned on the slide. So we see what a well-defined algorithm looks like. If it's well-defined Python syntax, we're returning true or we're returning false, and those are the only 2 things that can happen. So when someone says, no, you misunderstood my theory, that's not really what my theory says, again, that will disappear from philosophy forever. Once we translate 3,000 years of human thought into this form. But once we do that, this, certain problems can't happen anymore, and I think that's very good for philosophy. So I mentioned the problem of indefensible existence claims. Okay, do you need to claim that numbers, lines, circles, references, moral facts exist? Well, there's a couple things you can do here. Because you can objectively compute the output of certain theories in certain situations, there's 2 things we can do here. If somebody claims that an entity needs to be posited in order to explain some phenomenon, well, then they should, I think that they should be forced to, or at least socially pressured to show. I don't know what it means to force them, but I think they should be pressured to show that if you only sort of posit certain entities that we know for sure to exist, that we can, personally, physically see, and try to show that we don't need to posit these other entities. I think they should have to show that we don't need these non-physical, non-mental um, entities to exist in order to explain the phenomenon. Now, perhaps more interestingly, and very similarly, if I want to show that you don't have to posit these non-physical entities in order to explain the phenomena, then I should have to show, I should be able to define my own theories and say, look, I explained this phenomenon or these phenomena, and I didn't have to define any notion of number as an abstract entity or claim that it exists in Platonic heaven or anything like that. So it's something very similar. I see this being analogous to what happened with some of Einstein's work, actually, where people believed in what's called the luminiferous ether. Most people just call it the ether, and people thought that that this thing had to exist in order to explain, I won't go into it, but certain phenomena in physics. And Einstein was able to explain the phenomena and not posit the existence of the ether. So did he definitively show that the ether doesn't exist? No. But he did explain the phenomena that you believed in the ether in order to explain. So why would you believe in the ether anymore? So I hope that we can do the same thing with executable philosophy, and people just show you think you need to explain those phenomena to explain, or you think you need to posit those entities to explain this phenomena. I just explained it without positing that thing. No reason to believe in it anymore. Just like the ether. So there's a third problem I mentioned with how philosophy is done, and that is ignoring or really just not being able to deal with the complexity of every branch of philosophy at the same time when you're trying to make your put forth some argument or some thought experiment. And I mentioned suppose two trolley cars are heading in opposite directions simultaneously. Well, here's the kind of thing that you can do in executable philosophy. So we have a notion of physics. Somebody's defined Einsteinian physics. You define two trolley cars, and you create some world where you say, in the Einsteinian sense, suppose that simultaneously you have trolley car 1 heading in some direction, and then trolley car 2 heading in the opposite direction. If you run this code, this last line will throw an error. It will not let you proceed because you use the notion of simultaneity improperly. You presuppose that it's possible for things to be, that it's possible for there to be absolute simultaneity in the Einsteinian sense. It's not possible, so the code prevents you from continuing. The person doing this ethics thought experiment did not have to directly think about physics. In software, lots of people build a bunch of different components, and then if you need that component, if you need a notion of simultaneity, you import it. Someone else dealt with, a definition of simultaneity. You don't have to know anything about the details. But you can just try to use this notion, and if you, again, use it incorrectly, then you can be prevented from doing invalid philosophy. So you don't have to deal with complexity, but you get the benefits as if humans were capable of thinking of all philosophy at the same time. We're effectively augmenting human intelligence with computers. So in this case, if you were to say reference frame equals 0, in which case we would say, okay, we're not saying there's absolute simultaneity, but if these things are simultaneous according to a certain reference frame that is at rest, at rest and not moving relative to the two trolley cars that start moving apart, that is valid according to Einsteinian physics. But if you don't specify that, this is invalid. So it keeps you honest without you having to deal with complexity. So in order to to emphasize just how much trouble current philosophy is in, and just how much better philosophy could be, I'd like to have you think about the following analogy. So imagine if mathematicians never defined their terms, if they just debated and argued for hundreds or thousands of years about what a prime number actually is in the true sense, and not just what a good enough definition seems like. If mathematicians had done that, you would have no proofs, you'd have no axioms, no theorems. You wouldn't have rigorous math if you hadn't defined your terms and then proven, or in this case computed, sort of upward from there. So half-jokingly, sometimes I like to say that philosophy has almost begun. We're very, very close to starting. We're defining some terms. We're about to start computing, deriving theorems, computing results, now that people have debated for a long time about which definitions we should use. Now, I'm very liberal about this. I think people can define whatever they want. When you say something is a denoting phrase, you can define whatever you want. I don't care. As long as it's syntactically valid Python, as far as executable philosophy is concerned, that's totally valid. So, okay, what are some other applications of executable philosophy? Because if it's as successful as I think it can be, what it can do for us extends beyond just philosophy. So, I would like to, at some point, create a new field of knowledge that I call computational law. We should be able to translate, we should be able to take the law, which is in English, state, federal, county laws, implement those in a well-defined programmatic form, and create a gigantic is legal function, where the input is some action performed in some jurisdiction, and the output is, well, if it is legal, it returns true, and we can just compute the fact that it is legal. Or if it's illegal, we could return false. It'd probably be more helpful to return a list of the laws that were broken or something like that. So we could automate lawyers away if executable philosophy is successful and people are excited enough about it to help contribute definitions and implement the philosophical theories that they're most passionate about or that they know best. There's people who have PhDs in analytic philosophy who are very good at it, who are experts in individual theories. Maybe they've created their own dialect of a certain theory, and they know very well, what Russell meant by a denoting phrase, and they could help flesh out the details of that theory. But computational law, I think, is exciting. You could automate the law. So related to that, a more sort of general version, we could create a new field called rigoristics. Notice that there's nothing that's actually specific to philosophy about anything that we were doing. Any idea, as scientific theories I want to implement, we saw physics being implemented there in code, Einsteinian physics. Being able to take anything that is not very well defined, perhaps expressed in English or German or some other natural language. If we develop expertise of taking English sentences and making them more precise, that extends well beyond philosophy. And I'm excited about people having very, very deep respect for philosophy and the clever abstractions and definitions we're capable of coming up with, and techniques for making other things more rigorous. Right now, philosophy is not exactly known as the most rigorous thing in the world. Logic, the most rigorous thing that exists. Logic and math, it doesn't get any better than that. Executable philosophy and using software, things are also well defined. That's also important. But if we're good at making things rigorous within philosophy, I think that we should be able to do that with ideas outside of philosophy. And when it comes to making notions more precise, I should say that doing mathematical philosophy and experimental philosophy, I think, are a very important part of this. So using mathematical techniques in software and maybe representing things as mathematical objects with a certain structure that we can prove things about. Math is very good at proofs. Right now with executable philosophy, you're computing facts, but they're not super rigorous proofs. But if we start introducing math at a deeper level through mathematical philosophy in particular, then we can make executable philosophy even more rigorous and do philosophical proofs, not just philosophical computations. And with experimental philosophy, implementing empirical findings or other scientific findings in code would be great. And then thirdly, another application, belief recommendation. So there's very personal and very important questions that people have, and things like, I've heard that Christianity and gay marriage are incompatible. Is that true? I can imagine a future where people are saying, here's something I believe. Is it logically consistent for me to also believe these other things? And we can compute that for them, provided a well-defined notion of Christianity or homosexuality or what have you. So very, very deep human questions we can help people with. And just within philosophy itself, of course, is it consistent to believe these three philosophical theories? There's often subtle inconsistencies that philosophers don't notice for decades. And oh, wait a second, there is a problem here. If we can automatically detect certain of these problems, then that's a really big deal. But belief recommendation for all people, all types of beliefs, anything we can make well defined is pretty cool. So if you want to help revolutionize philosophy, you can visit code.executable.philosophy.org and see all of the scientific and philosophical theories and ideas and objects that have been implemented in Python. They're well-defined, that we can use to compute facts about what these theories say and other aspects of philosophy. So thank you for listening, and please visit the website, executable.philosophy.org. Go there. Thanks.